The first Christmas in the new house felt magical. Snow fell in thick, silent flakes outside, blanketing the world in white. Inside, the air smelled of pine from the huge tree in the corner, and gingerbread cookies I'd baked earlier. Lights of every color twinkled from the branches, casting a warm, cheerful glow across the living room. I'd spent all day decorating, hanging garlands along the staircase, placing candles on the mantelpiece, and making sure every ornament was perfectly positioned on the tree. It was perfect. A picture-perfect Christmas Eve. As evening deepened, I curled up on the sofa with a mug of hot chocolate, watching the fire crackle in the hearth. The house was an old one, built over a century ago, and it had its quirks. The way the floorboards creaked in the hallway, the low whistle of wind through the window frames. I found it all rather charming. It felt like the house had stories to tell. I just never imagined I'd be part of one. The first odd thing happened around 10 o'clock. I was just about to head up to bed when the string of blue lights on the tree suddenly went out and flickered back on a moment later. I figured it was just faulty wiring, maybe a loose bulb. Old house, old wiring, it made sense. I didn't think much of it and made my way upstairs. I was brushing my teeth when I heard it. A soft, shuffling sound from downstairs, like someone walking slowly, dragging their feet across the hardwood floor. My heart gave a little jolt. I turned off the tap, listening intently. Silence. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself I was being paranoid. I was alone, after all. My imagination was probably running wild. I got into bed and pulled the covers up to my chin. The silence of the house was profound now, broken only by the distant hum of the refrigerator. But then another sound, a whisper, so faint I almost missed it. It seemed to come from right outside my bedroom door. I couldn't make out any words. It was just a breathy, sibilant hiss. I held my breath, my ears straining in the dark. It was gone as quickly as it came. Sleep didn't come easily after that. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every shadow seemed to twist into an unfamiliar shape. I must have drifted off eventually, because I was woken by a sudden intense cold. The kind of cold that sinks right into your bones. I opened my eyes and saw my own breath fogging in the air. The room was freezing, far colder than it should have been. My window was closed. The heating was on. There was no reason for it to be this cold. That's when I saw the lights again. Downstairs, through my slightly ajar bedroom door, the Christmas tree lights were going haywire, flickering on and off, red, green, blue, yellow, in a frantic, chaotic dance. It wasn't a loose bulb. This was something else. A cold dread crept up my spine. I knew I should stay in bed, hide under the covers, and wait for morning. But a morbid curiosity, a need to know what was happening in my own home, pushed me out of bed. Tiptoeing to the door, I peered through the crack. The living room was bathed in the erratic flashing of the tree lights. And then I heard the footsteps again, closer this time. They were pacing back and forth, right in front of the Christmas tree. A slow, measured tread. Shuffle, pause. Shuffle, pause. I couldn't see anyone. The space in front of the tree was empty, but the sound was undeniable. My hand was trembling as I pushed the door open a little wider. The air that flowed into my room was icy. The whispering started again, louder now. It seemed to be coming from the tree itself, a chorus of faint, overlapping voices murmuring indistinctly. They sounded sad, lost. As my eyes adjusted to the strobing lights, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The ornaments on the tree were moving, not just swaying gently, but shaking. The little glass angels, the shiny baubles, the handcrafted wooden soldiers, they were trembling on their branches, as if an invisible hand was rattling the entire tree. One of the glass balls, a bright red one I'd hung near the top, shook so violently that it fell. I flinched, expecting it to shatter on the floor, but it just stopped. It hovered in the air for a second, a foot from the ground, before dropping with a soft thud onto the rug, perfectly intact. I should have screamed. I should have run. But I was frozen, pinned to the spot by a mixture of terror and disbelief. My gaze was fixed on the space beneath the tree, where the presents I'd wrapped so carefully were stacked. A shadow was forming there, a tall, slender silhouette that wasn't cast by any object in the room. It stretched and warped, growing darker and more defined with each pulse of the colored lights. It looked like a person, standing with their back to me, looking at the tree. The whispering grew into a single clear word, spoken in a child's voice, right beside my ear. Cold, I gasped and stumbled back into my room, slamming the door shut and fumbling for the lock. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break. I scrambled back into bed, pulling the duvet over my head like a child hiding from monsters. The sounds from the living room continued, the frantic footsteps, the mournful whispers, the shaking of the tree. It was a symphony of fear, playing out just beyond my door. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, shaking and listening. The cold in the room was unbearable. I could still see my breath fogging under the covers. Gradually, ever so slowly, the sounds began to fade. The footsteps stopped. The whispering died down to silence. The erratic flashing of the Christmas lights gave way to a steady, peaceful glow. The profound cold in my room began to recede, replaced by the normal warmth of the house. I didn't dare move until the first rays of dawn crept through my window, painting the walls in soft gray light. Christmas morning. It felt like a lifetime ago that I was sitting by the fire, feeling cozy and safe. Cautiously, I got out of bed and crept to the door, unlocking it and pulling it open. The living room was quiet. The sun streamed in, glinting off the tinsel. The tree stood peacefully, its lights twinkling warmly. Everything looked exactly as I had left it, except for one thing. On the rug, beneath the lowest branches of the tree, sat the single red ornament that had fallen. And next to it, in the thick dust that had gathered under the tree skirt, were footprints. They weren't mine. They were small, slender, like those of a child. And they were bare. My eyes followed the trail of tiny footprints. They led from the Christmas tree, across the living room, and stopped directly in front of the fireplace. There, on the stone hearth, something was scrawled in the soot. It wasn't there last night. I knelt down, my heart pounding. 2 words, written in a looping, childish script. So cold. I later found out from a town historian that a family had lived in this house many decades ago. They had a young son. One Christmas Eve, there was a terrible accident. A fire started from the old Christmas lights on their tree. The boy, they said, was never found. He just vanished. I still live in this house. Every Christmas, I leave a thick blanket and a pair of warm slippers by the fireplace. And every Christmas Eve, the whispers return. But they're not as sad anymore. And in the morning, the blanket is always rumpled, as if someone has been curled up in it, finally finding some warmth. I don't decorate a tree anymore. Some traditions are better left in the past. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to follow for more. The first sign something was wrong came on a Tuesday, 10 days before Christmas. I was wrapping gifts in the living room, a cheesy holiday movie playing in the background. My dog, Buster, a big golden retriever who usually loved this time of year, was whining by the door. I told him to hush, but he just kept scratching at the wood, his tail tucked between his legs. That's when I saw it. On the bright red wrapping paper of a gift for my niece, there were 3 long, deep scratches. They looked like they were made by an animal, but way too big for Buster. I touched the paper. It was torn right through to the cardboard box beneath. I blamed it on a stray cat that must have snuck in, though I couldn't figure out how. I rewrapped the gift and tried to forget about it. The next night, the strange things continued. I have a string of old sleigh bells hanging on my front doorknob. They're heavy, made of solid brass, and only jingle when the door opens or closes. I was in the kitchen making hot chocolate when I heard them. A faint, solitary chime, then another. I froze, listening. The house was silent. Buster was right beside me, his ears flat against his head, growling low in his throat. I walked slowly to the front door. It was locked, deadbolted. I peeked through the peephole. The porch was empty, covered in a fresh layer of snow. Nothing. I told myself it was just the house settling, the wind, anything to calm my nerves. But the sound was so clear, so deliberate. It wasn't the wind. By the weekend, the snow was coming down hard. A real blizzard was rolling in, trapping everyone in their homes. The power flickered and died around 8 o'clock, plunging the house into darkness. I lit some candles, their flickering light casting long dancing shadows on the walls. Buster refused to leave my side, practically glued to my leg. The wind howled outside, a mournful, shrieking sound. And then, mixed in with the wind, I heard something else. A heavy rhythmic crunching in the snow. Step, drag, step, drag. It was slow, deliberate, and getting closer. I crept to the living room window and wiped away the condensation. Outside, through the swirling snow, I could see my neighbor's house across the street, dark like mine. The street lights were out. The world was just white and black. The sound was coming from the side of my house, moving toward the backyard. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. I didn't dare look out the back window. Instead, I sat on the floor, my back against the couch, with Buster whimpering in my lap. The crunching sound stopped. For a long time, there was only the sound of the wind and my own ragged breathing. I started to think I had imagined it, that the storm was playing tricks on me. That's when I heard the scraping, a sharp grating noise on the back wall of the house. It sounded like someone was dragging claws down the siding. It went on for what felt like an eternity. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Then a loud thud against the back door, as if something heavy had just thrown itself against it. Buster let out a yelp and scrambled under the couch. I just sat there, paralyzed by fear. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. The blizzard raged on, but the noises from just outside my house had stopped. I stayed put for hours, waiting for the sun to rise. When the first gray light of dawn finally filtered through the windows, I felt brave enough to move. The power was still out. The house was freezing. With a heavy flashlight in my hand, I forced myself to go to the back door. I unlocked it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. I pulled the door open just a crack and peered out. The snow in the backyard was a mess of deep, churned-up tracks. But they weren't human footprints. They were cloven, hoof prints. 2 large, deep impressions in the snow, leading away from my door and disappearing into the thick woods behind my property. And beside the tracks, something was sticking out of the snow. A long, curved horn, black as coal. I slammed the door shut, my mind reeling. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't a prank. This was something else. I spent the rest of the day in a state of terror, jumping at every creak of the house. The snow stopped in the afternoon, but the world outside remained eerily quiet. My phone was dead. I was completely cut off. As dusk began to fall, I knew I couldn't spend another night in that house. I decided to make a run for my neighbor's place. I layered up, grabbed the heaviest kitchen knife I owned, and took a deep breath. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that it was all in my head. I put my hand on the front doorknob, the cold metal a shock to my skin. The sleigh bells were silent. I turned the lock and pulled the door open. The cold air hit me like a physical blow. And standing there, on my porch, was a figure. It was huge, towering over me, a silhouette against the dying light. It was covered in dark, matted fur, and from its head curled two enormous twisted horns. Its face was lost in shadow, but I could see 2 points of light, 2 glowing red embers where its eyes should be. It didn't move. It just stood there, breathing in a low, guttural rattle. The air smelled of pine needles and something else, something rotten like old meat. In one of its long, spindly hands, it held a bundle of birch sticks. In the other, a large, stained sack. My mind screamed at me to run, to slam the door, to do anything, but I was frozen in place, my eyes locked on those 2 burning red lights. It took a slow step forward, its cloven hoof cracking the ice on my porch steps. The sound of sleigh bells echoed in the silent air, but they weren't coming from my door. They were coming from the creature itself, a dull, rusted clanking that seemed to mock the festive season. It let out a low chuckle, a sound like rocks grinding together, and it raised a long, clawed finger. It pointed not at me, but past me into my house. I didn't understand. I thought it was here for me. Then I heard a faint scratching from inside. Buster. He was scratching at the living room floor, whining. The creature's gaze followed the sound. Its grin widened, showing rows of yellow, pointed teeth. It knew. It knew I hadn't been alone in my bad behavior. Last summer, I got so angry at Buster for chewing my new shoes that I locked him in the garage all day without food or water. It was a moment of pure, selfish rage, one I regretted instantly and had tried to forget ever since. But this thing remembered. It didn't want me. It had come for the one who was truly naughty. It took another step forward, pushing past me as if I were nothing. I fell back into the snow, watching in horror as the dark, horned shape filled my doorway. I heard Buster's terrified yelp, a sound that was quickly cut off. Then, the heavy, stained sack was thrown over its shoulder. It turned its head, looked at me one last time with those burning eyes, and then it was gone, its heavy, hoofed steps crunching away into the darkness. The only thing left was the sound of distant, fading bells and the absolute soul-crushing silence of a home that was now truly empty. Merry Christmas. It arrived on Christmas Eve, a single beautifully wrapped gift on my doorstep. No name, no tag, just a heavy box wrapped in deep red paper with a shimmering gold bow. I hadn't ordered anything, and I wasn't expecting any late deliveries. Curiosity got the better of me, so I brought it inside and placed it under the tree, figuring it was just a secret Santa gift from a friend. That was my first mistake. Later that evening, as the fire crackled and the Christmas lights twinkled, I heard it, a faint rustling sound. I looked around. My cat was asleep on the armchair. The house was silent. Then I saw it. The gift, the one from the doorstep, was vibrating. Just a tiny tremor, but enough to make the needles on the tree branch above it tremble. I froze, watching it. It stopped. I must have imagined it, I told myself. Nerves, holiday stress. I went to bed, but the image of the trembling box stayed with me. Around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by a sound from downstairs. It was a soft, tearing noise. Rip, reap, reap, my heart hammered against my ribs. Was someone in the house? I crept out of my room and peered down the darkened staircase. The only light came from the soft glow of the Christmas tree, and there, in the middle of the floor, was the red gift. A long tear had appeared in the wrapping paper, as if something inside had clawed its way through. I stood there, paralyzed, my hand clamped over my mouth to stifle a scream. Then, a whisper. It was so faint, I thought it was the wind. But there was no wind. The whisper came again, slithering out from the tear in the paper. It was a cold, dry sound, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. It was my name. It whispered my name. My blood ran cold. How could it know my name? I wanted to run, to bolt out the front door and never look back, but I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the spot. The box began to shake again, more violently this time. The whole thing rocked back and forth on the floor. More tears appeared in the paper, spreading like a spider's web. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, dozens of voices all murmuring my name, beckoning me closer. I took a step down, then another. I don't know why. It felt like I was being pulled by an invisible string. The air grew icy cold, and a shadow in the corner of the room seemed to stretch and twist, deepening into an unnatural darkness that swallowed the light from the tree. The whispers were a chorus now, a cacophony of eerie, pleading voices that seemed to echo inside my own head. I reached the bottom of the stairs and stood before the box. It was almost completely unwrapped now, the red paper lying in shredded tatters around it. The box itself was plain, brown cardboard, but it seemed to pulse with a dark energy. The lid began to lift, slowly, a fraction of an inch at a time. The whispers stopped. An unnerving silence fell over the room, heavier and more terrifying than the noise. A thin, pale hand snaked out from the gap. The fingers were long, impossibly long and thin, like the legs of a spider. They were tipped with jagged, yellow nails. The hand flexed, its joints cracking audibly in the silence. It gripped the edge of the lid and pushed. The lid was thrown open. For a moment, I saw nothing but blackness inside, a void that seemed to drink the very light from the room. Then, two pinpricks of red light ignited in the darkness. They weren't lights. They were eyes. They fixed on me, and a smile spread across the face that began to emerge from the box. A wide, lipless smile full of too many teeth. But the most horrifying part, the thing that finally broke me and sent a scream tearing from my throat, wasn't the hands or the eyes or the smile. It was the face. It was a perfect, lifelike replica of my own face, twisted into a mask of pure, malevolent glee. It was me. And as it began to climb out of the box, it whispered my name one last time, not in a chorus of faint murmurs, but in my own voice. And it said, finally, "Room for one."